In the dusty archives of the Hartford Historical Society, librarian Margaret Chen had seen thousands of old photographs pass through her hands. Civil War soldiers, Victorian families, forgotten faces from America's past. But nothing had prepared her for what she discovered on that cold February morning in 2024. The package arrived without fanfare, donated by the estate of deceased collector Edmund Blackwood. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, lay a small daguerreotype dated 1899. The silver-plated image showed 3 children, their faces gaunt with hunger, their clothes little more than rags. Orphans, clearly their eyes held a depth of suffering that seemed to transcend the century-old photograph. Margaret's trained eye immediately noticed something unusual about the image quality. Despite its age, certain details appeared remarkably sharp, while others remained frustratingly blurred. She decided to run it through the Historical Society's new digital enhancement software. The same technology that had recently helped identify unknown civil war soldiers and reunite families with their ancestors' stories. What happened next would shake the genealogical community to its core and force historians to question everything they thought they knew about American history. As the enhancement software worked its magic, pixel by pixel, the 3 faces began to emerge with startling clarity. The oldest child, a boy of perhaps 12, stood protectively behind his 2 younger siblings. His hand rested on the shoulder of a girl who couldn't have been more than 8, her hollow cheeks and sunken eyes speaking to months of malnutrition. The 3rd child, barely a toddler, sat in the girl's lap, thumb pressed firmly against his lips. But it wasn't their poverty that made Margaret's blood run cold. It was what became visible behind them as the image sharpened. If you're already feeling the chill of discovery, wait until you hear what the genealogists found when they traced these children's bloodlines. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about American history. The enhanced image revealed architectural details that should have been impossible. In the background, partially obscured by shadow but now clearly visible, stood the unmistakable iron framework of a building under construction. Not just any building, but one with a very specific design that matched historical blueprints Margaret had seen before. It was the framework of what would become the Chicago World's Fair Administration Building, which wasn't constructed until 1901, 2 full years after this photograph was supposedly taken. Margaret's hands trembled as she cross-referenced the image with architectural records. The dating had to be wrong, but daguerreotypes were notoriously difficult to fake, especially with the level of authentic chemical degradation this one showed. She called in Dr. James Morrison, the country's leading expert in 19th-century photography authentication. Dr. Morrison arrived 3 days later, his reputation preceding him. He had authenticated photographs for the Smithsonian, debunked countless forgeries, and his word was considered gospel in the field. After 2 hours of meticulous examination under specialized equipment, his verdict was unshakable. The daguerreotype was authentic, created using period-correct techniques and materials, and definitely dated 1899. The implications were staggering. Either the official construction timeline of one of America's most famous World's Fair buildings was wrong, or something far more mysterious was at play. But the architectural anomaly was just the beginning. Dr. Morrison suggested they run facial recognition software against genealogical databases. If these children had living descendants, perhaps their family stories could shed light on the photograph's mysteries. Margaret uploaded the enhanced images to 3 major genealogical platforms, expecting a routine search that might take weeks to yield results. The first match came back in less than 6 hours. The oldest boy, with his distinctive deep-set eyes and prominent chin, matched with 97.3% certainty to a man named Thomas Whitmore, whose death certificate was on file in Chicago's records. But Thomas Whitmore had died in 1847, more than 50 years before this photograph was taken. The system had to be malfunctioning. Margaret ran the search again, this time manually inputting different parameters. The results were even more disturbing. The girl matched to Mary Catherine Whitmore, death certificate dated 1848. The toddler matched to Samuel James Whitmore, who according to records had died in 1846 at the age of 3. All 3 children had been dead for more than half a century when this photograph was supposedly taken. Dr. Morrison insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps these were children who bore an uncanny resemblance to the deceased Whitmore siblings. Genetic similarities could stretch across generations, creating doppelgangers decades apart. They decided to dig deeper into the Whitmore family history. What they found in the Chicago city archives changed everything. The Whitmore family had been early settlers in what would become Chicago's near west side. William Whitmore, the children's father, had been a carpenter working on some of the city's first major construction projects. Their mother, Elizabeth, had died in childbirth with Samuel in 1843. William had struggled to care for 3 young children, alone while working long hours in dangerous conditions. Then came the winter of 1846. Chicago was experiencing one of its harshest cold spells on record. Food was scarce, work was scarcer, and the city's few charitable organizations were overwhelmed. William Whitmore made a decision that would haunt his memory forever. Unable to feed his children and facing eviction from their single-room tenement, William brought Thomas, Mary Catherine, and Samuel to the Chicago Orphan Asylum on a bitterly cold February morning. The asylum's records, preserved in the city archives, showed their intake date as February 14, 1846. None of the 3 children lived to see spring. Samuel died first, succumbing to pneumonia on March 2. Mary Catherine followed 3 weeks later, her small body unable to fight off the tuberculosis that ran rampant through the overcrowded facility. Thomas, the strongest of the 3, lasted until early May, before a combination of malnutrition and disease claimed his young life. William Whitmore never recovered from the guilt. He died by his own hand 6 months later, leaving behind only a brief note. "I cannot live knowing I abandoned them to die alone." The story should have ended there, filed away in the tragic annals of 19th-century urban poverty. But now, 53 years later, these same 3 children appeared to be staring out from a daguerreotype that shouldn't exist. Margaret and Dr. Morrison found themselves facing possibilities that challenged their rational, academic worldviews. Could this be an elaborate hoax? A coincidence so astronomical that it defied mathematical probability? Or was something far more extraordinary at play? They decided to investigate the original source of the photograph. Edmund Blackwood's estate. Records showed he had acquired the daguerreotype in 1967 from a private collector in Salem, Massachusetts. That collector, according to records, had purchased it from the estate of a woman named Cordelia Marsh. The trail led them to Salem's Peabody Essex Museum, where Cordelia Marsh had been a longtime donor and volunteer. Museum records indicated she had spent decades collecting what she called spirit photographs, images that purportedly showed supernatural phenomena. Most of her collection had been dismissed by experts as either fraudulent or the result of photographic defects. But she had remained convinced of their authenticity until her death in 1966. Cordelia's personal notes, preserved in the museum's archives, contained a detailed entry about the Whitmore daguerreotype. She claimed to have acquired it from a psychic medium in Chicago, who insisted it had been taken during a séance in Itembabe Joshijo. The medium, a woman named Madame Theodora, allegedly specialized in spirit manifestation photography, claiming she could capture images of deceased individuals when their spirits were summoned. Margaret felt her skepticism warring with the mounting evidence. Every rational explanation was being systematically eliminated. The photograph was authentic. The faces matched deceased individuals with impossible precision. The architectural details suggested knowledge of future construction projects. And now they had a potential supernatural explanation that, while scientifically implausible, at least offered a framework for understanding the impossible. But Dr. Morrison wasn't ready to embrace the paranormal just yet. He suggested one more avenue of investigation, tracking down any surviving descendants of Madame Theodora to see if family records might shed light on her methods and the circumstances surrounding this particular photograph. The search for Madame Theodora's descendants led them to Chicago's Polish American Cultural Center, where genealogical records indicated she had been born Theodora Kowalski in 1854. She had arrived in America as a young woman, eventually settling in Chicago, where she established herself as a spiritual medium, serving the city's growing immigrant population. What they discovered about Theodora Kowalski's life was as remarkable as it was disturbing. She had lost her own family in a fire in Warsaw before emigrating to America. The trauma had allegedly triggered what she believed were psychic abilities, visions of the dead, premonitions of disaster, and an uncanny ability to locate missing persons. By the 1890s, she had gained a reputation among Chicago's grief-stricken families as someone who could help them reconnect with lost loved ones. Her specialty was spirit photography, a popular Victorian practice where mediums claimed to capture images of deceased individuals during most spirit photographs of the era were obvious frauds. created using double exposure techniques or pre-prepared glass plates. But Theodora's photographs were different. Multiple witnesses testified that they had watched her work under controlled conditions, with her subjects providing their own photographic plates, and still somehow capturing images that defied explanation. The Whitmore séance had been conducted on November 13, 1899, according to Theodora's meticulously kept records. The client was a man named Albert Whitmore, William's younger brother, who had spent decades searching for information about his brother's fate and the fate of his 3 young nephews and niece. Albert had learned of his brother's death years after the fact, but had never been able to discover what had happened to the children. The Chicago Orphan Asylum's records from that period were incomplete, destroyed in various fires and floods over the years. Albert carried the weight of not knowing, wondering if he could have helped, if he could have saved them. Theodora's notes from that session were chilling in their detail. The children manifested almost immediately upon calling. The eldest boy, Thomas, spoke first, saying they had been waiting for someone from their family to find them. They appeared exactly as they had in life, showing signs of their suffering, but also a sense of peace. The girl, Mary Catherine, remained close to her younger brother Samuel, who seemed shy and clung to her dress. They communicated that they harbored no anger toward their father, understanding his desperation and the impossible choices he faced. They wanted Albert to know they had found each other again in death and were no longer cold or hungry. The account continued with descriptions that matched perfectly with the enhanced account. Theodora noted that the spirits had insisted on being photographed together, wanting Albert to have proof of their continued existence and their love for their family. But there was more in Theodora's records that made Margaret's hand shake as she read. The spirits had apparently shared information about future events during the séance. They had described the great fire that would consume much of the old orphan asylum in 1908. They had mentioned the construction of great white buildings that would host visitors from around the world, an apparent reference to the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, though their descriptions seemed to reference buildings that wouldn't be constructed until 1901. Most disturbing of all, they had warned Albert about what they called the Great Shaking that would come to Chicago in 1906. Historical records showed that while San Francisco experienced its devastating earthquake in 1906, Chicago had suffered an unusual series of minor earthquakes that same year. Seismic activity that was rare for the region and had puzzled geologists at the time. The children's spirits had apparently been aware of events that had not yet occurred. When the photograph was taken in 1899, Dr. Morrison was running out of rational explanations. The evidence was pointing towards something that challenged everything he believed about the nature of reality, death, and time itself. But as a scientist, he insisted on one final test. He arranged for the daguerreotype to be examined by Dr. Sarah Chen, a physicist at the University of Chicago, who specialized in electromagnetic phenomena and had consulted on several cases involving allegedly supernatural photographs. Dr. Chen's equipment could detect energy signatures and electromagnetic anomalies that might explain unusual photographic effects. The results of Dr. Chen's analysis shattered the last vestiges of rational skepticism. The daguerreotype exhibited electromagnetic signatures, unlike anything she had encountered in 20 years of studying photographic anomalies. The silver particles in the areas where the children's figures appeared showed signs of exposure to what she described as impossible energy patterns, electromagnetic frequencies that didn't exist in nature and couldn't be produced by any known 19th century technology. More disturbing still, the photograph continued to emit low-level electromagnetic pulses more than a century after it was created. Dr. Chen's equipment detected what she called quantum entanglement signatures, patterns that suggested the image was somehow connected to events and locations across time. "I don't understand how this is possible," Dr. Chen admitted in her official report. "But this photograph appears to be some kind of temporal artifact, a genuine recording of an event that transcended normal physical laws. The electromagnetic evidence suggests that something extraordinary occurred during that emergency, something that left a permanent imprint on the silver particles of this daguerreotype." The scientific confirmation of supernatural phenomena sent shockwaves through both the photography authentication community and the broader academic world. Here was physical evidence, analyzed by respected experts using cutting-edge technology, that suggested consciousness could survive death and even manifest in ways that could be captured photographically. But the story was far from over. Margaret decided to reach out to Albert Whitmore's descendants to share the discovery of their family's supernatural photograph. The genealogical search led her to Chicago attorney Michael Whitmore, Albert's great-great-grandson, who had been researching his family history for years. Michael's reaction to the daguerreotype was immediate and visceral. He claimed to have been having dreams about 3 children for as long as he could remember, dreams that had intensified over the past several months. In these dreams, he was always trying to help them find their way home, but he could never quite reach them. More remarkably, Michael produced a collection of family documents that his grandfather had left him, including Albert Whitmore's personal journal. The journal contained Albert's own account of the séance with Theodora, but it also contained information that hadn't appeared in the medium's official records. According to Albert's journal, the spirits of Thomas, Mary Catherine, and Samuel had delivered a message specifically for their descendants. They had said that one day, someone from their bloodline would find the photograph and would need to help them complete their journey home. They had been waiting, Albert wrote, for the right time and the right person to help them find peace. Michael felt an overwhelming conviction that he was that person. Working with Margaret and Dr. Morrison, Michael began researching the original location of the Chicago Orphan Asylum. The building had been demolished decades ago, replaced by a modern housing development. But city records indicated that the original orphanage cemetery, where the 3 Whitmore children had been buried, still existed beneath a small park in what was now Chicago's near west side. The cemetery had been forgotten over the years, its existence known only to a few local historians. The children's graves were unmarked, their bodies resting in what had been the asylum's potter's field, a section reserved for those who died without family or means for proper burial. Michael felt compelled to visit the site. On a cold March morning, exactly 178 years after little Samuel Whitmore had died, Michael stood in the small park that covered the forgotten cemetery. Margaret had brought the daguerreotype with her, wrapped carefully in archival tissue. As Michael held the photograph above the ground, where his young relatives rested, something extraordinary occurred. Dr. Chen's electromagnetic monitoring equipment, which he had brought to document the visit, began registering massive energy fluctuations. The temperature around them dropped 15 degrees in a matter of seconds, and for just a moment, witnesses later swore. The air above the forgotten graves shimmered like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The daguerreotype itself began to emit a faint, silvery glow. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased. The electromagnetic readings returned to normal. The temperature stabilized, and the photograph's metallic surface, when examined later, showed signs of significant change. The images of the 3 children, which had been clearly visible even to the naked eye, had begun to fade. Not the overall degradation that might be expected from age or exposure, but a specific lightening of the figures themselves. As if they were gradually disappearing from the photograph, Dr. Morrison was baffled. In his decades of experience with daguerreotypes, he had never seen one change spontaneously. The silver encore process created remarkably stable images that could last centuries without alteration. Yet here was a photograph that seemed to be releasing its captured subjects. Over the following weeks, the 3 children's faces continued to fade from the daguerreotype, but something else was happening that amazed the researchers. As the supernatural images disappeared, other details began to emerge with greater clarity. The background architecture became sharper, revealing previously hidden elements of the scene, and, most remarkably, new figures began to appear in the photograph. Faint at first, but gradually becoming more distinct, were the images of adult figures standing behind where the children had been. As the enhancement software worked on these emerging images, facial recognition identified them as William Whitmore and his wife Elizabeth, the children's parents, reunited with their lost children in whatever realm exists beyond death. The family was together again. Michael Whitmore felt a profound sense of completion wash over him. The dreams that had haunted him for years ceased entirely. In their place came a sense of peace and resolution that he struggled to describe. He established a small memorial in the park where the children were buried, a simple stone marker acknowledging Thomas, Mary Catherine, and Samuel Whitmore, and the love that had transcended death to bring their story to light. The daguerreotype itself became a museum piece, displayed at the Chicago History Museum with full documentation of its extraordinary history. Visitors often reported feeling an unusual sense of peace when viewing the photograph, as if the love and reunion it represented somehow radiated from the silvered surface. Dr. Morrison published his findings in the Journal of Photographic Authentication, a paper that would become one of the most controversial and widely cited in the field's history. His conclusion was cautious but revolutionary. While we cannot fully explain the mechanisms involved, We must acknowledge that this daguerreotype represents genuine documentation of postmortem consciousness manifestation. The scientific evidence compels us to expand our understanding of what photography can capture and what forms of existence may persist beyond physical death. But as news of the supernatural daguerreotype spread through academic and media circles, other collectors began examining their own collections of allegedly paranormal photographs with new interest. The Whitmore case had opened a door that many had assumed was permanently closed. Within months, similar cases began emerging from archives around the world. A tintype from 1887, showing a woman who had died in childbirth, holding the baby she never got to meet. A carte de visite from 1901, depicting a Civil War soldier standing beside the grave where his body had been buried 37 years earlier. A glass plate negative from 1913, capturing an entire family of influenza victims gathered in their former parlor. Each case was subjected to the same rigorous authentication process that had been applied to the Whitmore daguerreotype, and in case after case, the evidence pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. Under certain circumstances, consciousness did survive physical death, and that consciousness could manifest in ways that early photographic technology was somehow uniquely suited to capture. The implications were staggering for both science and spirituality. If consciousness persisted after death, what did that mean for our understanding of human existence? If the deceased could communicate across the veil of mortality, what messages were they trying to convey? And why did this phenomenon seem to be concentrated in the early decades of photography, tapering off as technology advanced? Dr. Chen theorized that the chemical processes involved in early photography, particularly the silver-based methods used in daguerreotypes and tintypes, might have created conditions that were conducive to capturing electromagnetic manifestations of consciousness. The longer exposure times required by these early processes might have allowed for the gradual accumulation of paranormal energy that faster modern photography couldn't detect. Margaret Chen, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a new field of study that bridged historical research, genealogy, and paranormal investigation. Museums and archives around the world began sending their collections of allegedly supernatural photographs for authentication and analysis. What had started as a routine cataloging job had evolved into something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of academic research. The story of the Whitmore children and their impossible daguerreotype spread far beyond academic circles. Families began examining their own old photographs with new eyes, wondering what stories might be hidden in the shadows and what love might transcend the boundaries of death. Michael Whitmore received hundreds of letters from people who had been moved by his family's story. Many shared their own experiences of dreams, visitations, and unexplained phenomena involving deceased relatives. The photograph had become a catalyst for conversations about mortality, love, and the possibility that death might not be the absolute ending we had always assumed. But perhaps the most profound impact of the Whitmore daguerreotype was not on the scientific or academic communities, but on individual people who found comfort in the possibility that their loved ones might not be truly gone. The photograph offered tangible evidence that love could transcend death, that families could be reunited, and that suffering, even the tragic suffering of 3 orphaned children in 1846 Chicago, could ultimately find resolution and peace. The 3 orphans who had stared out from that 1899 daguerreotype had indeed horrified genealogists, but not for the reasons anyone might have expected. They had horrified the researchers by forcing them to confront evidence that challenged everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the persistence of human consciousness. In the end, Thomas, Mary Catherine, and Samuel Whitmore had achieved something remarkable. Through their supernatural photograph, they had bridged 2 worlds, reunited their family across the veil of death, and offered hope to countless others that love truly is stronger than death. And as their images faded from the daguerreotype, replaced by the figures of their reunited parents, they left behind a legacy that would forever change how we think about the boundaries between life and death, between the seen and unseen worlds, and between the rational and the miraculous. The photograph that had once shown 3 suffering orphans now displayed a family complete and at peace, proof that some stories have endings more beautiful than anyone dared to imagine, and that some love is indeed eternal. If this story has moved you as much as it moved the researchers who uncovered it, share it with others who might find comfort in its message. Subscribe to hear more stories that challenge our understanding of reality and remind us that there is far more to existence than what we can see with our physical eyes. And remember, somewhere in dusty archives and forgotten collections, Other impossible photographs may be waiting to tell their own stories of love that transcends death and hope that survives beyond the grave. The Whitmore daguerreotype stands as testimony that the most powerful force in any realm, physical or spiritual, is the unbreakable bond of family love. And sometimes, just sometimes, that love finds a way to manifest in our world, captured forever in silver and light, waiting for the right moment and the right person to reveal its eternal truth.